One state, two cities. Which one's the winner? Hey, if you're thinking about transitioning to the state of Missouri and you're torn between St. Louis or Kansas City, well, you've come to the right place, because in this video, we are going to compare St. Louis versus Kansas City. That way you can see for yourself what each state is all about, as well as what it has to offer. By the way, if this is your first time to this channel and you want to know everything there is about living in the state of Missouri, then simply subscribe to the channel by tapping on the bell below. That way, you'll be the first to receive information about the changes that are taking place in the real estate market. My name is Chris Pucci. I'm with the Living in Kansas City real estate team, and we get calls from folks just like you every day. So if you're thinking about moving in 9 days, 90 days, or even 9 months, please feel free to reach out. I can be contacted by voicemail, text, email, or better yet, schedule a Zoom call. All the information is listed below, and trust me, there's nothing we'd like more than to help you make that smooth move into the state of Missouri. Housing and the cost of living. In Kansas City, and you have to understand, Kansas City sits on both sides of the Kansas-Missouri state line, but we're going to talk generally right now. What's the average price for homes in Kansas City? They're around $275,000 to $475,000, depending on the neighborhood. If you go to the Kansas side, Johnson County, for instance, and you're talking about Overland Park and Leawood, you're talking more in the neighborhood of $455,000 to $500,000. Now, as far as the cost of living in Kansas City really is pretty reasonable. In fact, it is 9% below the national average. And that includes things like housing, groceries, transportation, and utilities. And one of the big perks, though, is if you live on the Kansas side of the state line, the real estate taxes in Kansas are much lower than they are in the state of Missouri. Now, let's talk a little bit, though, about St. Louis. You'll find a lower entry point, particularly if the housing is located in the city proper. There, you're starting at home, starting in the neighborhood of $120,000. When you move into premier suburbs like, say, Clayton and Ladue, or Kirkwood for that matter, the prices are going to climb quickly. As much as now you're talking about homes that are in the $400,000 to $700,000 range. St. Louis, though, does boast an even lower cost of living than Kansas City. Actually, their cost of living is about 10 to 50% below the national average. But you got to keep in mind, one of the reasons for that is the fact that the taxes in Missouri are much higher than they are in Kansas. So what's the takeaway? Well, if you're looking for, let's say, newer homes in suburban settings with lower taxes, then the Johnson County suburbs are going to be your best opportunity. While on the opposite side, if you're looking for neighborhoods with a lot of charm and history and a good price point, then you're going to be looking in the St. Louis area. Both cities have a great deal of different price points that you can select from based on your budget. If I was going to say which city here has the edge over the other in this particular category, I'm going to lean towards St. Louis. Now, just so you'll know, I'm a Kansas City native and I live here in Kansas City, but I have spent time in St. Louis. I have a lot of friends who live there. And one of the things that's always struck me about St. Louis is they've got some really cool historic neighborhoods. So that's the reason why I'm giving St. Louis the nod here in this particular category. So the next category we're going to talk about, and this is also probably the second most important on people's minds, and that has to do with schools and education. So I'm going to start here again on the Kansas City side of the state, and we're going to talk about, in particular though, the Kansas side, if you will, of the Kansas City metropolitan area. So think in terms of Overland Park or Leawood or Lenexa, because here you're going to find some of the highest rated public schools in the state, if not the Midwest. For instance, Blue Valley School District, the Shawnee Mission School District, the Olathe School District. These schools consistently rank as some of the best in the nation And one of the advantages of having the best of the nation public schools is you're not forced to rely on private school. So now let's talk about the schools in St. Louis. Now, the public school system is facing some challenges, but if you head out to the county, it's a whole different story. The suburbs like Ladue and Clayton and Parkway, schools in this area are outstanding. Now, St. Louis not only has some of the top public schools, and they're also home to some of the top-rated private schools in the region. If you're needing flexibility with regards to private versus public schools, St. Louis is going to have that card pretty well covered. How do they compare? Well, if you want strong public schools without the need to have to access private schools, Kansas City, particularly the Johnson County suburbs, are going to be able to meet your requirements. Conversely, if you want to move up into elite suburbs in the St. Louis area, then you might consider private schools along with top-rated public schools. So, who gets the edge in terms of who has the better school systems? I'm going to say this is a draw. Both cities give you the opportunity to access top-flight schools. Let's go check out our third category, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's the job and the economy like in each of these two cities. So, for instance, here in Kansas City, we have a very diverse and growing economy. It's centered around things like healthcare, logistics, technology, as well as architecture. Kansas City has the highest concentration of architectural firms who specialize in stadium design than any other city in the United States. The St. Louis economy, it is based around aerospace, healthcare, finance, as well as education. Now, as far as job growth, it's not quite as dynamic as Kansas City's. It's more steady. And in terms of unemployment, St. Louis's unemployment is actually a shade better than Kansas City. It's at 8%. So if you were to compare these two markets, you would say, hey, Kansas City has a 3.9% unemployment, and it's got an expanding tech, logistics, and healthcare markets, if you will. St. Louis, slightly better in unemployment, it's 3.8, and it has a strong base in terms of aerospace as well as finance. If you are chasing a fast-paced, growing economy that has a high presence in tech, then Kansas City is where you're going to probably gravitate to. If you're looking for sort of a steady job market with a strong presence in aerospace and finance, then you're probably going to be leaning towards the St. Louis market. One that Kansas City and St. Louis get a lot of national notoriety, but it's not the good kind. This happens to do with safety and crime. So if safety is a top consideration, you're not going to be alone. Both of these cities have reputations that are frankly quite unflattering. Although they have higher incidents of crime than some of the other major metropolitan areas, most of that crime is really regulated or restrained or constrained in the more urban core areas. The suburbs, they truly are very, very safe. So for instance, let's talk about Kansas City. Now, their Kansas City urban core is struggling when it comes to crime. In fact, property crime is about significantly higher than the national average, and particularly in neighborhoods that are east of Troost or close to east of downtown Kansas City. Conversely, though, if you live in the suburb, these cities rank among some of the safest cities in the state. And that has to do with the fact that they have low violent crime and strong community policing. So let's now move a little to the other side of the state, and let's talk a little bit about St. Louis, because St. Louis has historically been one of the most crime-challenged cities in the United States, especially when it comes to property crime and gun violence. However, the good news for St. Louis is that gun violence has dropped 45% in the year 2025. And that has to do with the fact that they have implemented a number of safety investments and community programs that's led to this dramatic drop. Like Kansas City, depending on where you live, that's going to determine whether it's a high crime or a safe area. So if you're in the suburbs like Kirkwood or Chesterfield or Webster Grove, you're going to be in a city that has some of the lowest crime rates in the state. In both cities, though, the core urban areas are going to contain the highest risk. Conversely, the suburban zones, especially the affluent areas, they are statistically very, very safe. It's less about the city, it's more about the zip code. So what you want to look for are zip codes that have low crime rates, strong schools with strong policing. So whether you're heading to Kansas City or St. Louis, location matters. Both cities offer safe, vibrant suburban communities, but you're going to have to be very selective of where you make your home if you're selecting an urban area. Which city gets the dubious winner of this particular category? I don't think either one has an edge over the other, so we're going to give this one a try as well. So what you've seen so far, let me know which city would be your preference at this point. Let's talk about the weather. Everybody likes the weather. So let's start out talking about the temperatures. Now, both cities have hot summers and they have cold winters. Now, St. Louis, though, as a rule, is just a little bit warmer all year round than Kansas City. In July, in both cities, the highs are in the mid-90s. But in winter, St. Louis averages slightly lower winters with temperatures in the mid-20s, while Kansas City, their lows are going to be more in the lower 20s, dipping into the teens and maybe even to the single digits. In terms of moisture, St. Louis gets about 40 to 45 inches of rain compared to Kansas City, which gets about 40. But Kansas City is going to get more snow than St. Louis. Kansas City typically averages somewhere between 15 and 18 inches of snow. Now, both of these cities are subjected to severe weather. Kansas City sits actually right in Tornado Alley. So from about the end of March to about the first week or two in June, there is always the chance of a tornado. Now, St. Louis, their biggest issue is flooding, particularly along the Missouri River, and they're also those subject to a large number of hot, humid days. So when it comes to overall climate comfort, Kansas City has a little bit of an edge due to the fact that we have slightly drier air, fewer days of extreme humidity, and more sunny days. In fact, Kansas City has 215 sunny days, which is more than the average for the United States, which is 205. St. Louis, they're slightly below the average in 202 days. And according to Best Places, as far as the Climate Comfort Index, Kansas City rates a 7.2 out of 10, and St. Louis receives a 6.8 out of 10. Kansas City is better if you like drier air, cooler summers, and you don't mind a little snow. But if you're looking for, say, warmer winters, and you can handle humidity and rain, then St. Louis might have a more appealing climate. I'm going to give the nod here to Kansas City for two reasons. One, they have the tornado season, and that brings a lot of fun excitement to spring. And more importantly, though, they have fewer days of humidity, and I'm going to tell you, there's nothing more miserable than a hot, humid day in the summer. So now what we're going to do, we're going to focus on our last topic, and that has to do with culture, lifestyle, as well as entertainment. So we're going to look at these different components and how these components really separate the two, from things like music, museums, food, festivals, and all the other fun things you could do that make these two remarkable cities so much fun to live in. So let's just start first off with Kansas City. So you've got the 18th and Vine District. This is where jazz and blues was born. Next to that area, you have what's called the Crossroads Arts District, which on every first Friday, they have a huge street party. You've got food trucks, you've got vendors, you've got all sorts of other activities going on. It's just one crazy party. And you don't want to miss the Nelson Atkins Art Museum. This is a nationally and internationally recognized museum, and it's free. And it also contains the largest collection of Asian art in the Western Hemisphere. Now, St. Louis, they counter with the Forest Park, which is a 1,300-acre cultural paradise. That's where you're going to find the amazing St. Louis Zoo. It's free. It is one of the best zoos I've ever been to. You've got the Art Museum, the Science Center, as well as the legendary Mooney Outdoor Theater. Now, in terms of things to do, Kansas City, they've got a streetcar which you can use to enjoy the River Market, Crown Center, Union Station, the Liberty Memorial World War I Museum, which, by the way, that is the only World War I museum in the United States. Hey, and if you're a lover of barbecue like I am, then you're in the right place, because Kansas City truly is the barbecue capital of the United States. It's home to the American Royal, the largest barbecue contest in the world. It attracts teams from nationally as well as internationally. And speaking of flavors, St. Louis delivers bold flavors as well. From Italian eats on the hill, to the craft beers in Soulard, to neighborhood festivals, farmers markets, and the Gateway Arch Riverfront area, which offers year-round fun, most of which is free. What's kind of neat about this is both cities, though, are continuing to invest in lifestyle. So, for instance, Kansas City is investing $800 million in their Riverfront Stadium area. This is the home of the Kansas City Current, which is Kansas City's women's professional soccer team. Now, St. Louis, large scenic parks, as well as citywide festival. If you're into sports, what sporting opportunities or venues are available? Well, here in Kansas City, this is where we have NFL royalty. This is home to the Kansas City Chiefs, 3-time Super Bowl winners, but you also have the Kansas City Royals major baseball team, as well as the home to the Big 12 basketball tournament. Now, St. Louis, if you're a baseball or a hockey fan, you've got that historic St. Louis Cardinals franchise, winner of 11 World Series, and you've got the National Hockey League St. Louis Blues, who actually won the Stanley Cup back in 2019. So 2 really powerhouse organizations. As far as culture, food, and sports, you can't go wrong with either city. Kansas City has a large selection of sports venues, great museums, wonderful food. St. Louis, great city. Again, museums, science centers, great food. All of these things make both of these cities really terrific places to live and have a tremendous amount of different venues that you could take advantage of that meet your particular lifestyle. So, of these 2 cities, which one has the edge? Well, I'm going to give the nod to Kansas City, simply because when I look at the culture and the art and the food, they're all pretty comparable. But if you like sports, Kansas City has more major sports than St. Louis, so there's a lot more diversity that Kansas City has to offer. A tale of 2 cities. So here's the thing. If you're thinking about making that move to Missouri, if you have any questions or you'd like to know more, let's set up a time where we can chat. All my contact information is below, so you can get a hold of me by phone, by text, by email, or better yet, schedule a Zoom call. And if you do me a favor, please like the video, and if you would, be sure to subscribe. All right, so one last thing before I let you go. In addition to being a realtor, I am also a lender. So, unless you're one of the lucky ones who can buy your home all cash, you're going to need financing. So if you have questions regarding financing, I can help you with those, and I can also help you navigate the process. So all of that being said, I want to thank you so much for watching my video. And until then, I look forward to showing you around the Kansas City area.